I'll wait until everyone is in. Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on which side of the world you're in. And welcome to the first panel as part of the Digital Art Month initiative that the CADAF team has launched for October 2020 in New York. We are very excited about the initiative, but also to kick off the panel with today's topic, which is around the importance of public art, both physical public art, and of course we'll discuss digital public art. Before we start and I introduce our guest for today, I just want to say that these panels are recorded. So if you don't want to show up in video, you can turn your video off. And also you are automatically muted, but we would like you to participate with comments and questions. Myself and my colleague Elizabeth will monitor the questions for our guests, and you can do that in the chat. So without further ado, I would like to welcome and thank our guest today, Savona Bailey-McClain, who is Executive Director and Chief Curator of the West Harlem Art Fund, Jess Conatser, the founder of Studio As We Are, which is also present in our Digital Art Month with several artists, Kendal Henry, who is the director of the program called Percent for Art in New York City, and Jeffrey LeFrancois, who is Executive Director of the Meatpacking District Management Association. I am Giulia Archetti, part of the CADAF team. And I'll just like to kick off with a statement for our guests today. It's a statement that I wrote, so it's my own quote. And it's about public art. So public art in communities can contribute to a community's identity, foster community pride, and enhance the quality of life for its residents and visitors. Now, this is an open question, so I don't know who would like to take it first, who would like to answer first, but what do you think about this statement? Is it true or not? Does it make it too simple in terms of public art? You're obviously here today as a sort of promoters and facilitator of the arts. And Jeffrey, you, on top of that, you're also responsible for the development and welfare of the Meatpacking District. So I'd like to ask you, what do you think about this statement? Is that true that public art can really help foster a community's identity and the quality of life of its residents and visitors?
Absolutely, in short. And first of all, thank you for having this panel, and thrilled to be on it with everybody here today, and as a neighborhood playing host to this Digital Art Month campaign, which is fantastic. And I think that it goes to show in the value of public art, the spectrum that it can reach of people, what we're learning living through a pandemic, and how art is informed around that, how we can still make art accessible. The best thing about public art is that it is accessible to the public. Whether it's digital art in this case, or a sculpture in the middle of a plaza or a park, you should not be prevented from experiencing it, visualizing it, being a part of it. And as somebody who oversees, a neighborhood and is responsible for cleanliness and programming and marketing and all that kind of stuff, economic development is a big part of what I do. And I can't imagine art not being a fundamental part of how we think about economic development as a neighborhood in New York City.
I'm gonna, add on to what Jeffrey just said. So that's a very interesting question, because that's a question a lot of municipalities, a lot of organizations ask, because there's always funding attached to it to make these things be realized. And just looking at my own program, my program started, the Percent for Art program out of the Department of Cultural Affairs, started in 1982. And if anybody remembers what New York City was like in 1982, it was, you know, graffiti ridden. It felt dangerous. You know, just if you don't know, look at some movies that was made in New York City back then. And the idea to create a program like that, which basically says that whatever the city's building, 1% of that construction cost must go to the commissioning of work of art, when the city was basically almost bankrupt. That shows the level of importance that art could play in the rebuilding, if you will, of a city. It's not just, and that's the same for the subway system, that's the same for the city at large, and that's the same for many different organizations that have these types of programs within their cities, and there's about 500 of them plus. So to answer your question in a long drawn out way, yes, and it's been proven over and over and over and over again that, you know, public art, and particularly, is very important to the, you know, the revitalization, to the economic development, to the civic pride of communities. And that's why we keep doing it. And that's why everybody is interested in it. And that's why it's still happening through hard times and through prosperous times. And, you know, and I'll end with saying, just look what happened when George Floyd was murdered. Look what happened with the economic, you know, turn down. You know, artists are just going out there and being supported and sort of speaking their minds about this time with art all over the place. So there you go. That's my quick answer to that question.
Jumping in,
Yeah,
really, when you look at public art historically in the United States, it goes back, you know, to the early 19th century, and with mostly statues. And that's why statues are becoming such a controversy right now, Confederate statues. But then it shifted in the 1930s. And when it shifted, it was because of Franklin Roosevelt and the New Deal. So you had the Federal Art Project, and then you had the Farm Project, which dealt with photographs. And then you have art and architecture, which led to percent for art. So we've always had public art in the United States. It's just gone through many variations. And it really shifted again in the 1970s, you know, speaking to what Kendal is talking about, where it went from being this national type of program where it was propaganda to show how the government was caring about the people, to more local art. So now we have more art that's localized, and communities can engage and also have a say in what the art is going to be in their community. It's more site specific, and that has been the continuation of public art in the United States. Now we're looking at ways to make it more accessible, because when you look at communities of color, they have less public art than in more wealthier, established neighborhoods. And now we're trying to figure out how to make that balance. And I think Digital Art Month is trying to help bridge those divides so that there could be more accessibility of public art. That's my 2 cents.
yes, and I think you've all kind of said a few things that I would like to then continue the conversation on. But I'm going to start, Savona, with you and with what you said now in terms of the public art in the US that existed since sort of the beginning of the 19th century, which is true. Obviously, in general, public art existed. I'm thinking also in Italy, back in the Renaissance, for example. It was extremely important as perhaps a confirmation of wealth of certain family, patronage, etc. So the evolution of public art throughout the years has become incredibly sort of interesting and sort of different throughout the centuries. But what are the challenges, you know, especially from your point of view? You have been involved in various projects also of public art. What are today the bureaucratic hurdles, for example, in order to, and it's probably ties into your idea of also of access. It's not just getting people to public art, but how do we get more access from a point of view of processes and bureaucratic sort of stages to build more public art. And now I'm talking about obviously physical public art, installations, sculptures, and then we can also delve deeper into digital art, for example, and what could be the positive of bringing in more digital art. But now I wanted to ask you a little bit about the challenges and how maybe we can overcome those challenges in your point of view.
Well, cost is the biggest challenge. I think everybody would agree to that. You know, the cost of public art, dealing with infrastructure, where you wish to place the art, and then getting community buy-in. Those are some of the main issues in presenting art. And then you have government agencies like Percent for Art and other types of entities like in New York, DCAS. You have other school construction authority that get percentages of funds for building a structure, and then they include public art. But when you're talking about temporary public art, it's very expensive. And you have to deal with a lot of hurdles: insurance, installation, de-installation, community boards, you know, the politics of that, so that you can just get to the point of presenting a public art, which has a variety of styles. It could be installation, it could be a mural, it could be a sculpture, freestanding work. So those are some of the hurdles that we go through. To make it more accessible, that's difficult. It's also about perceptions too. How do you get sponsors? How do you get people to financially support you? And you have people that want to get the most bang for the buck. And sometimes that's not in poorer neighborhoods or communities of color. How do you raise the funds, get the support to present those arts? I think digital art might help. And I've done some digital installations where that helped to deal with costs, making things more cost effective, cost efficient, last a lot longer. So it's all of those challenges together. And I'm sure Jessica can speak to it, Kendal can speak to it, and then Jeff as a sort of presenter in the Meatpacking district of some of the digital works you're showing this month.
I think with Digital Art Month, thank you for having me, guys. Good to be here. It's been a really kind of exciting moment for all of us because, like you said, it's allows for us to create a very accessible kind of experience across New York City because of social media platforms that everybody has access to. And what we wanted to do here is work with artists from around the world who are already creating augmented reality sculptures or face mask effects and put them in new environments so people could get out of the house in a safe way and go to their favorite neighborhoods, but experience it in a new way. And also digital art is experiential in nature, which is an exciting, I think, aspect for this like public art display because, for example, you know, you have some of these augmented reality pieces that are like orbs and they move and you can kind of interact with them. And even though it's not there, you can capture this unique experience with the city being the backdrop and really kind of create a better, you know, commute for yourself. Or if you're going there to see it because, you know, you're huge into augmented reality and in the digital art scene, that's awesome too. It gets you out of your house instead of just projecting it into your home. You can go and experience it in, again, one of your favorite neighborhoods.
And I think that art should cost money. Artists are creating something, there's value in that. You know, that Savona mentioned, like the WPA, Works Progress Administration, and government funding art, it's critical. It was critical to the identity of the United States, you know, World War II, post-World War II. New York City's funding of the arts is integral to the city's identity, whether it's as the city as a whole or each neighborhood. It's unfortunate that to produce public art, it costs so much money because it's a barrier. But at the same time, I struggle with this because we also want artists to see the value in their work. You know, it means something to be a creator and to be an artist, and you should be compensated for that. So it's a difficult sort of world to operate in because it's a public benefit. The list is long, I think, when it comes to benefits of art. And at the end of the day, it's determining the value of supporting that. And I think New York City, our arts budget is huge. When you compare us to other cities in the country on scale, and then internationally, we spend a tremendous amount of money on our cultural organizations, and for good reason. It's not all public, but a lot of it is. And so I think that it's tricky, but it's really important to recognize that art has value and artists need to be valued in the form of pay. So it's important to recognize that.
Yeah, I mean, Jeffrey, can I ask you, I mean, from your point of view, obviously, yes, and also here we're talking about New York City, which is one of the cities in the world that has most art, that is definitely one of the, as a city, biggest supporter of the arts. But I agree with you, we should really now be able to try and develop the presence of arts in smaller communities as well. That should be the aim. But especially the meatpacking, I think in the last few years has really seen an evolution where there's more and more art within the district. So from your point of view, and also when you have sort of open calls, or when you do sort of commission, is that the district that supports that from a point of view of an artist, artwork, and all of the cost for an installation?
Sure, it would be a combination of, it could be money from our, existing budget, or we would seek sponsors to bring, public art to our plazas. We were under construction for 5 years, and now we have amazing, massive plazas that we want to develop a public art program as a part of. We're hoping to kick that off. We have digital art going on right now, which is really fantastic. And I love walking out and seeing people doing it. It's sort of another form of art. You get to watch somebody interact with this as they interact on their own. And then as a part of what we would do for the neighborhood would be to spend money on public art and figuring out how to do that. And I mean, it's the reality that you want to get bang for your buck. That's important. And from an economic development lens, that means foot traffic, that means press, that means attention. And so how we get there is based on sort of what our goals are at the end.
Yes, Kendal, can I ask you a bit more about the Percent for Art program, and how do you work together with the districts and with the city when you have to develop a sort of a public art project? Mm-hmm. And how do you sort of choose the artist and what the process is? And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about one of your, I'm sure, many favorite projects that you worked on.
Well, I'm not going to talk about the favorite ones. There's some artists that's going to be out, and but
the one that you would like to share with us.
Let me think about that one for a minute. But yeah, so the way my program works is that when a facility is being built, I take 1%, and I do the 1% in quotes because it's not actually 1%, it's a percentage of a number, and it's very complicated math. But I take some of that money and I commission an artist. I'm going to get into that in a minute. And so the thing is, we don't determine where the project happens, right? So that the city determines, where construction determines where that project happens. Luckily, schools are being built all over the city within all kinds of neighborhoods. So, when we commission a work, we really take that into account, knowing that this may be the only artwork people in that community might see, because, they don't go to the museums, they don't go to galleries for cost purposes, for intimidation purposes. And, people just don't think that galleries and museums are for them. So they don't go, and for many different reasons. So that's good in that, we do projects in schools, we do projects in anything, in streetscapes, whatever it is. And so we can't do all of them, but we jump at the opportunities when they're in underserved communities, and really make a concerted effort to look for artists in those communities, to be part of that process, to be commissioned as part of that process. And I think one misconception that artists have is that they would have to have a lot of public art experience to do one of our projects. That is not the case. I would say about 85, 90% of our artists have never done public art before. And we like it that way because we get to, nurture a young artist into, realizing the opportunities that they have for doing public art outside of their studio work. And so within our process, we have what we call a panel process, where we have usually 2 meetings. The first meeting is we invite people to come. And again, different types of people come depending on what the project is. If it's a community that's really involved with their community, there's a lot of people that show up. If it's a place where there's not a really set community, that it's a more like, technical kind of group of people making a decision. But we make a concerted effort to really tap into local community, local culture as much as possible, and have that reflect in the artwork. And we don't determine what the themes are, but that comes from the artist, and we just require that it be site specific. We don't even define that. So the process is quite open, and I sort of always use these opportunities to let people know that this exists, that this happens, and please, look into being part of our process. Aside from that, we also work with, local, there are many different smaller arts organizations that commission artwork, and Savona being one of them. And, you have the BIDs have their own art programs, like Madison Square Conservancy has their art program within the park. The High Line, has their art program. So there's a lot of these different ones. And so if it's on city property, chances are I'm on the advisory panel for that as well. So I look to make sure that, that they're looking at a lot of these artists who may not have an opportunity otherwise. A lot of times people say, well, I want an artist from my community. That's great. And we always support that. But we also want to take artists from the Brownsville community and put them in a project in the Meatpacking district. Why not? We also want to take artists from Harlem and put them into like, Bed-Stuy, because New York City is one community, though it's made out of all these little communities. That's always been an issue with me, to sort of like spread the wealth and just not, and sorry to use this word, ghettoize artists within their community only. And so that's very, very important. And I'm going on a ramble here. I don't know if I answered your question, but yeah, so this is, and and going back to something what Savona said about when you asked a question about difficulties or challenges, the city itself is a bureaucracy. And I'm going to be the first one to admit that. And so I think we need to make a better concerted effort to reach and support these smaller arts organizations that may not have the funding, may not have the know-how, or may not have the resources of people, or the resources of funding, or the resources of whatever, to support them to do that public art in their communities. So yeah, that's my ramblings on, and yeah.
No, it wasn't a rambling at all. It was very interesting, but it really gave us a little bit more of understanding of how the program works and how the program can work with the various bits or the various other programs that are going on sort of in your city. And I thought that was really important. But in terms of the projects that you worked on, were there any then with digital arts, for example? Yeah,
so
you to choose amongst the various projects.
Yeah, so I work on 2 types of projects, and for the purposes of this conversation, I'm going to divide the projects into 2 categories: permanent and temporary. For permanent artwork, because of the funding, where I get my funding from, my funding is part of an architect of construction, of this part of the architecture. So it has to be a solid piece of something that lasts at least 30 years. So it's hard to use certain types of materials or certain types of media in that format. And because a big component of that is maintenance, right? And so all of my artwork is being placed in non-traditional art spaces. So I'm putting artwork in a police station, I'm putting an artwork in a school, I'm putting an artwork in a courthouse, where these are not art spaces. So these folks are not able, they may be able to change a light bulb, but they're not able to maintain a digital artwork, let's say. So it's impossible for me to do that kind of work, digital work in that environment. But I do work, I'm on the committees of Times Square, of Madison Square Park, of the DOT art, the Department of Transportation art program. And so they do a lot of temporary artwork. And so they can do this digital work, which is brilliant because, you know, the many facets of digital work allows the same thing, access. And there's many different ways of defining access, again, because people don't go to museums and galleries. But there's this other component of the interactivity. And when one is able to interact with art, like a digital art, like you described the virtual reality thing there, they now open themselves to knowing that they can access art, other forms of artwork. And so that's such a valuable kind of commodity to be able to do that. And with temporary art, there's this very contemporary issues that could be addressed. What's happening right now that a permanent work would not be able to address. So all these things are very, very important. That's why it's very necessary. That's why we need to support temporary art. That's why we need to support digital art. That's why we need to support the art in the communities that may last for a few minutes or a few days, and not just the permanent stuff. But there's a lot of support and there's a lot of infrastructure for permanent stuff. But you know, I think we need a better balance. And I notice I did not mention any of my favorite projects because I'm not going to do that. I have like too many, and I don't want to like sort of like, I like this one, and then that's all. I'm just being very political here.
Is there a way that people could find out more about the projects that were born out of Percent for Art? That perhaps, if the audience is interested in finding out more.
Yeah, so if you just Google NYC Percent for Art, Department of Cultural Affairs, we have, it's not the best website, I'll tell you that now, but that's the first place to take a look.
That's okay.
But there's also
in the chat. So
yeah, but we're just one of many arts organizations that do public art, and I like to always give a shout out for all the organizations that want to tread into the public arts realm within New York City, because we support each other, and we have the same goal pretty much. Yes,
of course. It's a community. I'm gonna do another sort of open question. Perhaps Jess, you might want to take it first. I think we've touched upon the advantages of digital art potentially versus physical public art. Flexibility, that for augmented reality, it could be placed sort of anywhere. It's interactive, so people can perhaps interact with it more and feel more part of the artwork. May cost less. It doesn't need all the infrastructure around it. But what about a generational limit to it? Is there a generational limit to digital art? I.e., does digital art speak more to us as millennials, for example, or Gen Z, but it doesn't quite cross over a certain age? Do you think that then we're missing out, a large part of the audience with digital art? And of course, it's meant to be quite a tough question, but
I mean, it's a great question. I think obviously millennials and Gen Zs we know about this. It's been a part of our life for much longer. It's what we know for the most part, especially Gen Zs. My younger sister only knows how to Snapchat and Instagram. That's how they communicate. But I think that, if we're looking for an example, like Digital Art Month, we use QR codes. And I think that when you add something like that, that is now widely accepted as something you scan to use for menus and all these things that you can actually then get an older audience in. And so I think really it's about how you present it, whether or not it becomes accessible for a larger age group or generational group. So for this, I think that some people are going to have a hard time wrapping their mind around it. I think that some people that I speak to that are older are like, is that actually art? And, you know, okay, that's subjective. We can decide, you know, on, from our own individual kind of perspective, whether or not something, you know, is that or not. But again, for me, it's just thinking about the concepts surrounding the presentation and understanding that, especially with public art, you know, you can't control your audience there. So what can you do? You can try and make it, again, as accessible as possible. And so with new media and digital art specifically, I think that, yeah, there's some best practices that can, again, make it more accessible. So I hope that, you know, answers your question somewhat.
Yes, you say that some practices sort of make it more accessible. But this is, I asked this question because this is also something that I'm interested in, and how to make, obviously we're talking about the realm of public art. So ideally a type of art that everyone has access to and understands and can enjoy. And how can we really make it easily understandable and easily accessible to everyone at any sort of age group? For me, this is something that as I was thinking about sort of this panel, that was, and, you know, was talking to my mom, and I thought, I wonder if the reaction for someone who is, for example, 65, like my mom, sort of would be the same, and how could we actually make sure that they also experience that and they learn how to experience that in a more sort of fulfilling way.
Well, I was going to jump in to say, you know, we're at an age where it's more about storytelling and sharing narratives. And that's one of the things that digital art can help with, because it's just a stone throw away from television and film that we deal with. And you can blend different disciplines more so with digital music, sound, and blending these different elements together can reach a variety of people if you add good storytelling. And if you want to make it more accessible, one of the things I had proposed years ago was having public art districts. We have historic districts. Why don't we have public art districts to help keep costs down, to make art more accessible in these districts, so people know that these gathering spaces are available to see things, to interact, to you know, critique. So there are a number of ways in which we can blend disciplines together with space, because I believe in public open spaces, so we can share these different stories and narratives, more so now than ever before, talking about family, traditions, backgrounds. So I think if we kind of talk with each other more about infrastructure and how we can have these different nodes available across the city in different disciplines, and then almost like crowdfunding, you kind of work together to build them up, I think we can make the city even more dynamic. And in spite of what people say that New York is dead, we can show them that it never dimmed.
Well,
Not even close. I laugh at them. I think that 100% to what everybody has said prior to this on this question, and to get technical on it, one of the things that I hope lasts out of this, living through this pandemic, are QR codes, and how comfortable people are getting with them, especially in New York City, in the United States. I know Europe and Asia has taken to QR codes long before the United States actually has. And this is thrusting us to catch up with the rest of the world for good in this case. And not so just about our menus and cocktails and stuff like that, but art and hopefully books and newspapers, and right, like just the amount of access it can provide by getting people accustomed to scanning that little code with their phone. Again, it's a whole new form of access, which is so much what this is about. I think, at the end of the day. And that's really exciting. And we're seeing it happen because of this Digital Art Month, and we're seeing it sort of, the timing is great, right? Everybody's gotten so used to QR codes in the past 5 months in New York City. And now, as Digital Art Month has hit public spaces, it's second nature to sort of swipe that QR code and just experience it and see what it is. And so hopefully there's a snowballing effect that comes from that as well.
Yeah, Jeffrey, I like your enthusiasm. So we'll see for the next Digital Art Month. We will be back.
Sounds good.
We will be in the Meatpacking district. I have a question. Maybe Jess, you can take this. I know you're maybe only speaking for the artists that you're presenting as a studio as we are, but there's Erin saying, what is the average age of sort of the creators of Digital Art Month? So Erin, from what I know from the artists selected, it's definitely every age. It's quite wide. It's not but Jess can tell us a little bit more about
yeah, totally. And I think this also kind of helps with your question before this, but I have, I'm working with artists who, gosh, I blush when I look at their age because I'm like, you're so young. They were born in like the mid-90s. But then also we have, artists who are in their 50s and 60s that are primarily working in the digital art space and making art, augmented reality pieces through Spark AR, and they're just as unique and interesting, and you would never even blink when you hear them speak about the digital art world. It seems second nature to them as well. So I don't think really digital art discriminates. Like, it's really for anyone and everyone who's interested in exploring how to create in this space. And so there's a wide range of age groups here.
Exactly. And I also think that artists evolve. So artists who are a little bit older than Gen Z, they might have started with the more traditional media, but then now have sort of evolved into also using new media art or technology for the art. So it's not necessarily, you have to be young or born in the 90s to include technology in your sort of art production. Sorry, I'm just, I think the age question has created a little bit of comments, which is great. So I'm gonna read a couple of comments to you. One is an artist says that she or he has been making digital art since the 1990s, and it's more of a question of the built-in bias towards accepting art that you have to turn on and figure out, rather than just looking at something and understanding it. Yes, exactly. I agree. And it says most audiences don't like to be told they have to work, especially since most public art viewers are passerby of passive seekers. Yes, I agree. But this is also one actually of the positives, I think, of digital art. It engages the audience more, perhaps. Whereas, maybe a sculpture or an installation can attract more people. So especially if it's in a square, it can create a little bit of a community, but it could be a very passive way of looking at something. You're just sitting there and you're looking at it. Whereas with digital art, you actually have to engage with it. And also you become a little bit part of the artwork. So yes, I agree, but also hopefully it's a way to engage the audience more.
Yeah, I think just quickly, what we did with Digital Art Month is we, again, worked with artists who are already making these works through Instagram, like Spark AR and Snapchat lenses. So we, realized that a lot of people don't want to have to do extra work. They don't want to download a third-party app and whatnot. So I think using social media tools that most all people, not everyone, I know a lot of people want to take a detox from Instagram. Like, I totally get that, but most of us are on Instagram. Therefore, we were hoping that this would be an easier interaction instead of a more challenging interaction. But there are still definitely challenges with getting people to stop and interact in public spaces, for sure.
But then that's a trend that's I notice have been, you know, evolving over time, is the need for interaction in a public artwork to activate it even more than it's being just a sculpture that you just see. And again, people have been using QR codes to sort of do that, and there's speaking monuments and whatnot. But I think, you know, the trend towards, because of the way we do things now, everything is this level of interaction. You know, people are now looking at that, and artists are now looking at that for in their creation of artwork as well. So whether it be digital or in some other way of interaction is a very important component of the experience. You know, the passive sculpture, the passive art is sort of almost going by the dinosaurs to some degree. And people are looking for something to happen in the artwork, or something to be engaged with, or something to do. And the best types of artworks and the works that don't depend on that, but when it does have that element to it, it grabs the audience a little better, particularly if it's a temporary work.
Yes, agreed. Just want to mention something about Peter, who says that he's a 65-year-old plus attendee here, the guest, and he said, I just want to say that maybe I have not expressed my statement about digital art being less accessible to older people, and older meaning anyone that is not perhaps a millennial or Gen Z, but that was a completely general comment, in the sense that it could be true that, you know, people in that sort of age category might be less familiar or less used to using technology in their everyday life. So others are not completely tech savvy, depending also of the work that they do. So I was just wondering whether actually, you know, the guest on today's panel perhaps agree with me that we might miss out on a, you know, section of the population, those that are less tech savvy, and if there was a way perhaps to actually include those people in. And a lot of those less tech savvy adults, then once they use the QR code or they put on the VR goggle, they see how actually easy it is. But the barrier to entry, the idea that you have to use technology to engage with an artwork, might be for some, not for everyone, a little bit too much. So Peter, I thought that was a bit too long to answer in the chat, so I thought I share with with everyone, in case also my question was not sort of clear enough. I mean,
well, digital is not just QR codes, and it isn't.
No, not at all, not at all. Just
it could be audio. So dealing with, you talking about older generations, radio was considered innovative when it first hit the scene in the United States. And people are listening to more podcasts than ever before, and they could tune into what they're interested in. So digital could be sound. It could be, again, stories, or it could be commentary, or it could just be different experimental sounds. I think we're limiting ourselves to what the definition of digital is, because I think now more than ever, people want to hear the sounds of other humans, since we've been, you know, in quarantine. So it is upon practitioners and presenters to think of a variety of uses when it comes to digital, so therefore we can embrace everybody. So I don't think there are lost opportunities. I just think we need to sit down and talk about what those opportunities are, and that could better help connect and link people together.
yes, agreed. Thank you.
I just want to agree entirely on that too much digital is just thought of as one thing, but the spectrum is quite broad. In terms of the biases, I think that art is biased, art can be biased, and until there's that sort of fear factor, that wall is broken down, you're gonna feel like it's not for you. It might not be my first reaction to scan a QR code to experience art. So I kind of need that nudge. What is it that we can do? I see there's a question about marketing and how we can like encourage people to experience it in a way that meets them where they are and helps them bring them into that sphere of experiencing this type of digital art. The same can be said for interpreting an impressionist painting. Not everybody likes impressionist painting. Some people understand why they're painted that way. Likewise with cubism and, you know, various types of sculpture. So there's always a way that art can be seen as being biased and not for a particular person. And unfortunately, that comes from education. I think that breaking down those biases and getting folks to feel comfortable just approaching it. And public art plays a huge role in doing that. Public art is the first step for a lot of people of experiencing art. And so getting behind the walls of a museum or a gallery, I think it's really powerful. When I think, Kendal, you said how museums and galleries, sometimes people don't feel like they're for them. And in particular, I think we see that in communities of color, which is terribly unfortunate because that shouldn't be the case. And to have that built-in bias, we need to find more ways to break that down. And public art, I think, can play a critical role in doing that.
Yes, I was gonna, I mean, we only have 10 minutes left, and this is probably, but a bit of a long question. But another thing that I wanted to touch upon was public art as a catalyst for social change. I mean, one of the installation that I really liked, also because in one of my jobs, I actually had the chance to install the cage then in Venice, was Ai Weiwei's installation from a few years ago called "Good Fences Make Good Neighbors" in New York. And of course, it was about the global refugee crisis, and it was a very powerful. And it was meant to bring people to, you know, think about a very important social issue. Now, this is for me, is a very delicate topic, because should art also be used as a catalyst for social action, or has a completely different purpose to it? For example, bringing sort of community together, allow the development of a community through visitors, or, you know, by obviously installing an artwork. There's a lot of work spread in the community as well. It's always for me a very delicate, and again, I'll give you now the possibility of answering whether art should also take on, and sometimes it does it automatically without even, because artists, like we've seen throughout sort of the Black Lives Matter movement, how artists instinctively just were catalysts for social action by expressing what they were feeling in their emotion of the moment. But public art, especially permanent public art today, can it help in bringing social change? Should it help? Is that also a meaning to public art, in your opinion?
Well, I wanted to share the slides I shared with you, Giulia.
Yes, okay, let's do it.
With an artist I like very, very much, Melchin, and he did a land art project tied to Be Bind, and he was in California, and he helped this community to change land that was abandoned or not cared for, and to make them into these beautiful sort of gardens. And I thought that was, you can see they're beautiful. And it was involving community. It was involving those who were interested in helping to change the landscape from barren and to temporary to permanent landscape gardens. And I thought that was phenomenal because I love him. He's a great artist, very thoughtful, kind person. And I just thought this was, you know, a wonderful way of changing a community for good. And so sometimes, not always, public art have to, you know, deal with politics or the crisis of the moment. But when it does, these are some great examples of what you could do to involve local people, interested people, volunteers to transform a community permanently. So that's my example of what public art can do in the realm of social change.
I'm going to add to that too. I see public art when it relates to social change as a universal language. You know, it's a language that, you know, that is accessible to everyone, that everyone could understand at a certain level. And it's a tool that's wielded very well by artists who know how to use it. And because when there's so much going on and there's so much, you know, that are being screamed at, you know, at certain things, and we don't hear it anymore. And I think that art is a great way to open up our ears again and open up our eyes to things that we see all the time that we don't pay attention to, that becomes invisible. And art could sort of bring that to light. I mean, there's artists are working in, you know, the ideas around, you know, climate change, and the ideas around about you know, racial injustice, and we know these things, but we're, again, the words aren't getting in our ears. And so art is a fantastic way, a good catalyst to say, hey, look at this, look at me, and now that your attention, talk about this. And you don't feel intimidated by that kind of conversation because it's something that we could relate to. Every culture, in every, you know, has art, has that language. And so to tap into that, I think, is a very important tool.
Great. Thank you. Yes, I agree. I mean, you mentioned a universal language. Yes, that I should have mentioned it also in my, when I asked the question, but yes, and that is that fundamentally, I think the power of art is to speak across borders and to portray a message globally. So thank you, Kendal. I'm going to, we only have 5 more minutes. So I'm gonna maybe open up to the audience if they have any sort of more questions before we let you go. But thank you for participating. This is so important to talk about these things. So ooh, I don't know how to pronounce your name. I hope I pronounce it correctly. Brega Campbell. Breha. Okay, thank you. What immediate, like the cheese with an A. Oh, Bria. Oh, okay. Like the cheese brie. Oh, this is a very good way to say. There you go. Perfect. Bria, that's a great name. What immediate steps do you think need to be taken by professionals in the art world in order for digital art, crypto art, AR, etc., so new media art, to become accepted by a wider audience and popularized in the art world of today? Yeah, I think this is a very good question that might take us quite a long time to answer. But I don't know who wants to answer first or will contribute to answer this question.
I mean, I will put in my 2 cents. I think with CADAF and everything that I work on through my smaller studio, this is one of our big things that we're trying to do. And I think there's a lot of things that need to be done here. But I think on topic with what we're discussing, I'd like to really explore more hybrid experiences of merging like the digital space with the more traditional space to better communicate and educate a larger audience surrounding like what's possible. And then also just unpack like more accessible layers of digital art in public spaces versus less accessible, more obscure, challenging ways to display this art. So I think that's kind of like the most immediate step I could see through the lens of like the public art space.
I think that digital art has already been validated in a considerable way. Last year, the Whitney Museum of American Art, which is based here in the Meatpacking District, had an expose on digital art with stuff that came out of the 60s and 70s and sort of took you through a spectrum of art, not just of digital things, but digital interpretations. There were all these paintings of pixelated forms that come out of digital work, translated to paint and other types of art. So in terms of its platform, it's there. I think that the key is, how do you keep pushing it to the wider audience to have it be on par with the paintings and the sculptors and the performers that we hold in such high regard. And it's going to come, you know, whether people like it or not, it often needs to be adopted by our anchor institutions, be it sold at the highest price at the auction on the chopping block, or, you know, on the walls of the Whitney, or, you know, the Louvre or the Metropolitan. So I think it's marching its way towards that.
Yes, no, I agree. And also, perhaps there is a perception that a type of sort of medium is it's finally accepted when it also enters the market fully, like primary market and secondary market. But that's now, it's happening. Christie sold for the first time crypto art. They're now selling Marina Abramovich virtual reality piece. So it's getting market as well, which is obviously positive. So collectors, there will be more collectors out there collecting digital art and familiar with digital art, etc. To what extent do you think technology can help develop the presence of performance art in a digital environment, which require audience to be there? Are there any performance artists who have taken part in Digital Art Month? I think, I mean, in terms of performance art, live performance art now, no, but due to really the sort of the restrictions of the pandemic. But I don't know, maybe Jess, you want to take this answer in terms of to what extent do you think the technology can help develop the presence of performance art? So again, complement performance art, yes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're already seeing this a lot. I mean, actually, within Digital Art Month, we do have a few artists. 4040, they're a generative art duo, and they create audio visual sculptures and perform in spaces, and in really the audio component, like we were talking about earlier, really adds to what they're creating. So I definitely head over, I know we're running out of time, but head over to their Instagram, 4040. You can kind of see like what they're doing. And then we have Ben Heim, who is a creative technologist and a composer, a classical composer. And he does a lot of performances with his work as well. Like he'll play a musical instrument whilst algorithmic art is, you know, happening in the background from the music that he's playing. So I think that, yeah, there's tons of performance pieces that become more possible because of technology. I mean, Touch Designer is amazing. Like Vincent Husset, we did like a project with him last year, and we had this interactive art wall where people created their own works by walking through the space. It became part of their movement, became part of the artwork essentially. So there's a lot that is happening here that is really exciting, and I hope that gives you a little bit of an answer to your question.
Yes, Thank you. But also now we're reached well 8 p.m. in Italy anyway, so 2 p.m. where you are. So I'm gonna let our guests go and thank them again for their time, their expertise, their thoughts, everything. It's been great having spoken with you, and I hope we'll have panels again in the future, but also at some point maybe in person. I long to meet people in person.
Agreed, and maybe in Italy.
Yes, yeah, no, that'd be great. Come to Italy. It's good. Let's bring public art to Italy, that it's not from the Renaissance, so it's more contemporary.
Now we're talking.
Exactly.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.